on Talk News and Sports radio station, Nigeria Info FM. How are you doing today? We've come to the 25th day in the month of November. I am Gabriella. We get a kickstarter conversation today talking about the barricades among indigenous oil and gas players here in Nigeria. Now, our country is a very blessed nation, you would agree, yeah? It's one of the largest and even though the oldest oil producer in Africa, and that sector, that is the oil and gas sector, is one of the most important sectors in our country because our economy relies heavily on that sector. Oil and gas accounts for more than 90% of our country's exports and 80% of the federal government's revenue. Now, with this in mind, also remembering how, that sector suffered during the pandemic, there's been a lot of back and forth. There's been a lot of conversations about where do we go from here? What influence do we hold in terms of our indigenous, players, key players in that sector? So we're talking about some of the challenges that, the key players in the sector face in Nigeria and how we can actually surmount some of these challenges. Joining me to have this conversation is MD of Gove Energy, Faith Iroham. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me on the show.
Good afternoon, Gabriella.
You're welcome once again.
My pleasure to be on board.
All right, so let's get right into the conversation. How would you describe the oil and gas industry in Nigeria? Let's start a conversation there. Being one of the key players in that industry, how would you describe that sector in the country?
Thank you very much, Gabriella. The thing is that the Nigerian oil and gas industry is a major industry that we all know that drives our economic value as a nation. And in that regard, it's highly competitive and it requires dedicated expertise. So that's my answer.
And of course, you know that in these parts, it's always a peculiar conversation in the Niger Delta as regards oil and gas. But before we get to that, what challenges, for someone who is within that industry, what are the challenges you have personally experienced within the sector? Again, we've had conversations. I've had conversations with a lot of people within the oil sector, and they have, shared certain concerns and challenges. But I really would like to hear from you, Faith, in this matter. What would you say are some of the major challenges that have been persistent in not just the success of that, sector, but in the expansion of the oil and gas industry?
As an indigenous oil and gas player that have been operating for several years, there are three major factors that I've come to realize that are our major challenges. This lack of funding among indigenous players. We also have the litigation among marginal field operators. That's the second one. The third one is lack of technical proficiency among experts, indigenous players of indigenous companies in Nigeria. So those are the three major factors that we are facing as challenges.
Now, for a sector as rich as the oil industry, why is funding still a problem?
Most of the players, like as an indigenous oil and gas player, will find it challenging because the volume of funds that we need, like the marginal field players, there are certain amounts of funds we need to enhance production and other activities, to drive our economic value. So most of us are not able to provide such a fund for ourselves. So that is why funding is still a major setback in the industry.
Now, as one who is an indigenous player within that industry, like you already mentioned, being MD of the Gove Energy, again, how would people like you within that sector want to see some change in terms of funding, knowing that this is a huge problem? What role do you perhaps would you like to see the government play or any other party play in ensuring that the issue of funding is resolved for a sector as lucrative as yours?
Okay, first of all, I want to really appreciate the government, the federal government, for bringing a new Petroleum Industry Act in place. However, in that regard, I would like the government to, if possible, to provide a pool of funds where indigenous players can actually, borrow, and with stipulated guidelines for maximum return in that regard. So,
and do you think that would really solve solve the problem if there's that free access to borrowing?
Yeah, to an extent, it will really solve the problem. And I highlighted on stipulated guidelines for maximum return to avoid abuse on that.
Maybe you should expand on that a little bit more. I'd like to really understand, the workings of that.
Okay, among the indigenous operators, those are managing marginal fields. There are lots of litigation going on there, misunderstanding among partners, and inefficiency. So, if government intervene in that regard, providing a pool of funds, providing support for indigenous players, where they can borrow funds and return with interest, I think it will really enhance proficiency in that regard.
All right, we'd like for you to join the conversation as well. This is not just for my guests and I alone. We'd like for you to call in should you have questions, should you have comments as well. You can join the conversation. The numbers to call are 0817 923 0002, 0003 0007, or 0009. The WhatsApp number is 0809 030 6416. This afternoon, we're talking the oil and gas industry, specifically focusing on indigenous players within that industry, and some of the challenges they face. One challenge, like my guest has already mentioned, is the issue of funding. Now, I like, Faith, that we also expand on the other challenges you mentioned. Maybe you want to break that down a little bit more so we can further understand these challenges.
Okay, when I talk about the challenges, lack of technical proficiency is a major challenge in the oil and gas industry. When we talk about indigenous players, I would like to leave a message telling the indigenous players to enhance their operational efficiency in terms of expertise, to drive more value in that in indigenous oil and gas companies.
Now, let's see some of these issues that these indigenous players within the industry face. They are not peculiar to just that sector. You would find that people who are within other sectors always face similar challenges, and every now and then you hear people who try to profess solution to how these can be tackled, and many a time you hear, the government can play a huge role. Now, let's bring up the conversation, like you mentioned earlier, the issue of the Petroleum Industry Act. A lot of people had reservations, sentiments, some applauding, like you mentioned earlier, about that act. What really is your take about that, and how do you think that impacts on indigenous key players within the sector?
The Petroleum Industry Act, I think it provides a lot of opportunity for indigenous players to come on board when it comes to marginal field players. So in that regard, it's not something the indigenous company have to approach without paying attention to their technical capacity. So first, it has actually given the indigenous companies a backup to participate in upstream activities, in the marginal field activities. Yes. And at the same time, there are other sides to it. The other side is that if this indigenous players does not fit off in terms of technical proficiency, expertise, and finance, that opportunity would be, I think it would make you. So that was it.
Now, while you were speaking, I was thinking about, perhaps the impact that these indigenous companies have within that sector. So let's talk about that for a few minutes before, we gradually round the conversation of what role do you think, individual companies, these indigenous companies within the sector, what role do you think they play in the full scheme of things within that sector?
The truth that is that the indigenous companies have actually contributed a lot to the Nigerian economic growth in terms of oil and gas. The indigenous companies enhance production and commercialization, and they also provide cash returns to government. And when we talk about job opportunities, the indigenous oil and gas companies have actually provided a lot of opportunities um, for employment.
Mm.
Yeah.
All right, we do have a question here on WhatsApp. Remember, the WhatsApp number to send your questions to is 0809 030 6416. That is 0809 030 6416. Now, this question here is from Thomas. Thomas is sending this from Choba, and it says, "Hello, Gabriella. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to your guest as well. Please, can your guest expatiate on how people who may be looking to invest in that sector, the oil sector, I mean, can go about it?" Thomas is asking. Faith?
Okay. In terms of investment, before you make investments into the oil and gas industry, you need to know what you're investing and understand the market. You can't just make investments without understanding how the industry works out. So you go about making your research. You make your research and understand the aspect you're investing in, so you don't lose out. That's the first thing there. So secondly, you need to be competent. You need to understand what you're coming into doing the industry because it's highly competitive. So that's just it for someone that is looking forward to invest.
To invest in. How do you break even within that sector, especially like you just mentioned, the fact that there is that high competition? How does a company break even?
It requires a lot of focus. You understand who you are, what you're representing, what your company is doing. You need to understand it, and you drive towards your goal, and be a good person. So sometimes it doesn't really matter what you know. It's the relationship management. So I can say with those few things, understand who you are, know what you're coming into the industry for, and on your mission, and be a good person. I think it doesn't just apply to the oil and gas industry. In whatsoever we do, when you project these factors, I think you will thrive.
So what future perhaps do you anticipate for these indigenous key players within the sector?
With the new PIA on board, I see a very bright future for all of us indigenous players. The thing is that we can't get there without competence and representing who we say we are. So with proper focus and commitment, I know we will get to the height we are looking forward to.
How would you rate? I was going to just wrap this up, but I'm really curious to know. So I'll just ask maybe this question, and then we do just that. How would you rate the influence? Let me use that word. The influence that these indigenous companies have within the sector, because from certain reports I actually went through, some people actually argue that indigenous key players within the industry struggle for that level of influence. How true is that, and how would you measure the influence that indigenous companies have and enjoy within the sector?
The indigenous companies, they are trying, although the influence, I would say that the new PIA gave us a lot of opportunities to come out, because previously it was as if we were more like limited to certain things. But currently now, I think that's where this question will be answered, Gabriella. We will be able to influence more. But
I do hope that happens for you, as a player in that area as well. Anyway, Faith, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your time on the show.
Thank you, Gabriella.
Have a lovely afternoon. And that has been the conversation right here on the sunny side. If you are within the industry or you're planning to get into the industry, it's great that you know certain things and how you can maybe surmount them as the time comes. 1 o'clock.